Good morning, folks. Welcome to the UBC Learning Circle, hosted by the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. Today we have Gerry Kasten here to talk about gardening and planning and starting our gardening beds. So it's a very wet spring day here in Vancouver.
It is very
what I'd first like to do is acknowledge the ancestral lands of the unceded ancestral lands of the Musqueam people, whose territory we're currently hosting the session from. And of course, land is a very important part of today's topic when we talk about gardening and how that links to our health and well-being. I'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the Learning Circle. And to introduce myself, I'm Melanie Rivers. I'm from the Squamish Nation, and I'm the education coordinator with the UBC Learning Circle. We also have Davina in the room, who's helping answer questions and help with some of the technical stuff. So you may see her in the chat. Please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat box. We've got some folks dialing in the teleconference. So hello to Telehealth Bridge there, and to the folks that have joined us on the webinar. Please use the chat box and make sure you select all participants so that your questions and comments show up for all. I'm going to introduce Gerry to you all, and we will have an informal session today, so a bit of back and forth, and if folks have questions as he goes, I'll check the chat box, and those on teleconference, if you have a question too, you can wave at us and unmute your mic, but I will pause for questions as well. I'll just read you Gerry's bio. So Gerry is a registered dietitian. He loves food. So do I. He was born to a farming family and still helps his brother bring in the harvest each year. He has an honors diploma in commercial cooking and has both a bachelor's and master's degree in nutrition. His master's research was on food choices amongst gay men. He has worked in public health in BC for the past 27 years. And is an adjunct professor at the University of BC's dietetics program, if I've said that correctly. He has led the board of directors of both Dietitians of Canada and the BC Agricultural and the Classroom Foundation. Gerry's checkered past has led him to a critical analysis of the constructions of gender, particularly as they are enacted through food. He wants to live in a world where people celebrate food, sharing it with those they love, taking its pleasure without restraint because its flavor saturates the most sensuous appetites. So welcome, Gerry.
Thanks, Melanie. Melanie and I worked together at First Nations Health Authority some years ago.
Yes.
So it's really a pleasure to be back. And I too would like to thank Musqueam for bringing us onto their land today. What we'll be doing today is, first, we're talking about gardening, of course. First, we're going to do some chat about pots, and then we're going to talk a bit about seeds, and then we'll do some transplanting, and we'll do actually a bit of harvesting as well, and then we'll do some direct seeding. So a little bit of everything. I really like to start out by saying that I am in no way qualified to give this presentation. That all of my gardening, I'm not a master gardener. I have no training. I help my brother on the farm, which usually means driving the truck and emptying it and driving it back. And so all of my experience is just from stuff I've picked up over the years. So it's a very informal session, and you shouldn't take what I say as gospel, but just the stuff that I have experienced. And so let's start out by talking about pots. So pots, to me, are really important. To you, they may not be as important, because I'm talking a lot about pots because all of my gardening is balcony gardening. That I have over the years had some garden plots in community gardens, but for the most part, my gardening I do in pots on my balcony. I'm really, really fortunate because I have a west-facing suite. And so I have a beautiful, large balcony and a big, big sunny window that makes my place a lot like a greenhouse.
Nice.
Yeah, it was nice. So a lot of what I'm talking about is pots, but is equally applicable to people who are gardening directly in the dirt. And they're actually likely to have better outcomes than in pots because they have a greater array of plants that they can choose from. So there's all kinds of pots to start out with. One of the things I have is I have a little pot maker. So this is the box for the pot maker, and this is the pot maker itself. It's just a round, thick dowel, and it's got a little base, and it helps you to create pots out of newspaper.
Oh.
So I just have like the top of a page of the Georgia Strait. So you can see here's a copy of the Georgia Strait. I just took like 3.5 inches, I think it is, and just took a ruler and just ripped it off, or a pair of scissors or whatever. And the Georgia Strait is like the perfect size. It's the gardener's friend, the Georgia Strait.
Well, very environmentally friendly to create your own pots.
Yes, and it's like all the news that's fit for wrapping fish. You just circle that right around the pot maker. Right? You can see I've just circled it around, and then I just fold in the bottom. Fold in the bottom, and just see I have it set down, and I just twist it. And that just really firmly folds the paper. And then what you can do is just slide it off of the pot maker.
Can people buy those just at a gardening store?
I bought mine from West Coast Seeds. And then what you can do is you can just fill this with dirt. I told them that they need to ask the cleaner to do an extra vacuum after we finish our session,
Or we
because
could grow some plants in here.
yes, in the carpet.
Yeah.
And so that's really great. You just have these little pots, and they're super convenient, and you can use them to create anything. Now, this is one option. There's lots and lots of other options for pots. There's pots that I've just made out of things. So this one I made out of a milk carton, right? This one is a Metamucil container. And this one is, I think, wet ones. So I just cut the tops off, and then I drill some holes in the bottom. So I brought along this dry roasted peanuts container, and I'll make a pot out of it. I just take my X-Acto knife, and I have a nice locking X-Acto knife, because the problem with a lot of X-Acto knives is the blade slips way out, and then you cut yourself.
Yes.
So I just, there's a nice corner here, and I'm just going to follow that corner around. I just stick my X-Acto knife in and follow that corner. Oh, I bet that's a nice noise through the microphone. There we go. I cut the top off, and now I have a pot. And the other thing I'm going to do is take my trusty drill, my electric drill, and I'm just going to drill some holes in the bottom. Now, I use a drill. Oh, yeah. There we go. Very tough plastic. There we go.
You're just around the edges?
So what I did was I drilled holes where the bottom of the container is, because the water will, of course, go to the lowest point. So I just drill a hole there. Now, I use a drill because I have one, right? But you don't need to use a drill. You can just poke holes in it with a scissor, just twist the scissors. If you can heat up a paper clip on your stove and melt a hole in. There's all kinds of ways. You don't need to have a drill if you don't have a drill.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to make holes. And then I just fill that up with dirt. You can see I have a very expensive scoop here. What is it? An evaporated milk can. And so I just fill that up. Now, there's some other containers that are really, really wonderful when you have things like the little pot maker pots. And that is, I got this lovely mini greenhouse.
Yes.
And so this, one day somebody brought a cake to work, right? And so I was like, can I have the box? And they're these beautiful, like they're perfect for making greenhouses. They seal.
And you leave those outside rather than inside?
To start with, like in the winter, because I started some of these, some of the plants you'll see I started several weeks back. But you can just take that, and that's just one of these little pots, and I have a cucumber plant growing out of it now. This I started about a week and a half ago. And they're so nice because you can just put water in the bottom, and I just take some water, and you see it actually holds water quite nicely. I just have a little shallow pool of water, and I can just set that on the windowsill and put the lid on and snap it down. And now I have this beautiful little sealed container that's a perfect greenhouse. And so if you have a sunny window anywhere in your home, then you can just put that on the windowsill, and the plant will get nice and warm, and it'll be like, you can fool the seeds. You're like, oh, it's spring.
It doesn't feel like it here.
That's right. As long as it gets, and it doesn't even necessarily, if it's a window that would be sunny, even though it's pouring rain and cloudy, there's still the ultraviolet light coming through that really warms up these little greenhouses. Now, another lovely little greenhouse that I have are these ones over here. This one is full of strawberries. This is a sushi container. So if you get takeout sushi, here in Vancouver anyways, at Fujiya, it's like our sponsor today. They're actually not our sponsor today. But it's a beautiful clear plastic lid and a dark plastic base, and it comes and it's full of sushi, but I grew some strawberries in this. So there's some little tiny baby strawberries in there.
And for me, that's the most important plant.
Yeah?
Yes.
This one I have is, I just put the seeds in, and this one is cumin. And they're just starting to sprout. There's a couple of them that you can see have...
Oh, yeah.
So I actually started those a couple days ago, and they're just starting to sprout. I'm growing cumin because, first off, it goes in everything, right? It's a really lovely spice that we use in curries and in Mediterranean food, and so. But I'm actually growing it because the kind of flowers it has. I'm trying to grow more plants that have these special flowers. They're called umbels. If you think of dill or an upside down umbrella, right? An umbrella that's blown inside out and it all turns up, that's an umbrel. And the umbrel has flowers on the tip of each of those spokes. And those umbelliferous flowers, the flowers that are umbrels, they attract beneficial insects that will eat aphids. Because I have a real problem with aphids. And so I've tried things like planting nasturtiums. Now, nasturtiums, they don't they don't kill aphids or anything. What they do actually is attract aphids, because the aphids love to eat nasturtiums.
Right. So then it keeps it away from your plant.
That's right. All my other plants. But I really have an aphid problem. So that maybe because I grow so many nasturtiums.
Right, they're very attracted to your...
That's right. They're like, come on down the street. I have this great cafe. So
all you can eat cafe.
That's right. And it's delicious nasturtiums. So that's why I am growing these umbelliferous plants. These plants that have flowers that are called umbels. There's several that I'll show you as we go through the day. So that's why I have the cumin started. And then the strawberries, these are little babies, but I like to really refresh my strawberries through the years. And it's really easy to do because, you're out and you have strawberry plants. I have them in, I don't know if you've seen those strawberry containers. Mm-hmm. It's a container, it goes out, it looks like an urn, but then it has little cups on the sides. Mm-hmm. And so you grow strawberries in the top, but also in the little cups. Mm-hmm. So each year I clean out 2 or 3 of the cups and put new strawberries in so that it keeps refreshing so the plants don't get tired of producing. Mm-hmm. And then all you need to do is to refresh the strawberries is when you're out picking, you pick all your strawberries and inevitably you miss some. Mm-hmm. Right? There's some that are buried under the leaves way at the back and you don't see them, and you find them 2 weeks later and they're all kind of dried out, and that's the perfect time to take those dried out strawberries and actually just push them into one of those cups, or to push them into one of the little paper pots, mm-hmm. or into a sushi container. Mm-hmm. And the seeds have dried, and once you've got 3 or 4 strawberries in there, take the whole container, like this sushi container, wet it down, and put the whole thing in the freezer. Mm. Leave it in the freezer for about a week. That tricks the strawberries. They think it's winter. And then after a week, you take it out of the freezer and put it on that sunny windowsill. And the greenhouse will heat it up inside, and once again, the strawberries will think, oh, it's springtime, and they'll start to grow. So that's why I have clumps of strawberries in here, because it's where I put the original strawberries, and each little seed actually grows into a whole bunch of strawberries. So that's why I really like these containers, because they're so shallow, but they have this nice clear lid, so they're great for little tiny plants like strawberries, but they're also great for starting seeds that you can then transplant later. So sushi containers like that, the cake things I see everywhere. Mm-hmm. Right? So but I don't know, I don't think there's any takeout sushi in Shkatine.
No.
So it's like...
Maybe when they go down to Whistler.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. Maybe when they go down to Whistler. Okay. So, pots is where I get started.
So is your freezer and your apartment full of plants?
My fridge freezer is. Yeah. I have a fridge freezer and I have an upright freezer. And my upright freezer is getting empty because I've really been working this year on eating everything out of my freezer. Because I really need to get to the bottom of my freezer. Okay, so now that we've made some pots, the next thing we can do is look at some plants that I've brought along. So I showed you the cucumber. It's really baby. It's still a baby. It still has, I'll just pull it out again. Like, you can see, it seals quite effectively. There we go. So there's the lid. You can tell it's still a baby because it just has what they call the seed leaves. So, I don't know how well people can see, but there's just 2 little leaves there. And so those seed leaves, Oh, do you want to hold it right up to the camera? It's wet. The seed leaves, that's the first 2 leaves. And the first 2 leaves, that shows that it's a baby plant. After the first 2 leaves, it will start to put out its natural leaves. And you can see that with this tomato. This tomato here, there's the 2 seed leaves, and then you can see there's natural leaves. So these are kind of tomato-shaped leaves, but these are the seed leaves. So that's how you can tell it's moved from being a baby, now it's like a toddler plant. So once they get to be toddler plants, you can think about transplanting them to a larger pot. Because I put 2 or 3 seeds in each of my little paper pots. And that's really convenient because then I can break them and put them into bigger containers. So I brought along some containers. I think actually for the tomatoes, what I'm going to do is put them in some deeper containers. Because the great thing about the deeper containers is you can fill them up. So you can start with a little bit of soil in the bottom. And then this is really nice because the paper, of course it's all wet now, you can strip it off. And you see it actually holds together fairly well. There we go. And now I can break this into 3 individual plants. There's 1 plant and a second and third plant. And so what I would do with these is I set them right down into my container. There we go. And this way I can bury part of the stem, because the part of the stem that I bury will become roots. And so that gives the plant a really firm root system. And you can see I've left most of the, I've filled it up quite a bit, but I've also left quite a bit of space. So as I take these plants, put them in the container,
Is this all still being inside?
yes, I'll leave these inside. And as I fill it up and partly bury that stem, like I said, it helps build a big root, but now it'll continue to grow. And as it grows taller, I can continue to bury the stem.
Mm.
And that way, by the time you get ready to transplant it outdoors, you have a plant. Here, Davina, I'll get you to show it off again. You can see there's that much dirt, but I have this much space for the plant to grow up. And you can just show them inside the container. And now I'll just soak these and just let them keep growing.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll just grow and grow and grow.
And how often do you water them?
I water them actually every day, but I water them from the bottom. So what I do is I put them on a little saucer. That's a very little saucer. I put them on a saucer, or you know what I actually use sometimes is the bases of those sushi containers. Yeah. And then I fill that full of water, and the soil draws the water up through capillary action. And so it sucks the water up. And that way you never have to get the leaves wet. Because if I watered this from the top, there's a good chance I get the leaves wet and that they might mildew, and that would kill the plant. So watering from the bottom is a really great way of keeping them really nice and moist, but not having to worry about them getting sick. What am I doing here? Okay, so now I've transplanted a couple plants. So the next thing we can do is talk about some plants that are really, really easy to grow from already existing plants. So I have a nice empty little container here. I'm just going to fill that up with dirt. Just filled a little container full of dirt here. And what I did was I bought some lemongrass. Just lemongrass from the grocery store. I went to Real Canadian Superstore and I bought some lemongrass. And so I took that lemongrass and I just put it in a glass of water. You can see I have 4 stems of lemongrass. I just stabbed them through with some barbecue skewers and I set them into water. And after about 3 weeks, you can see that they've developed quite a lot of root. And so now all I'm going to do is take it off of the skewer. Perhaps easier said than done. There we go. Take it off the skewer. Just take my plant of dirt and stick my finger in. And just create a nice hole. And then plant that. I just want to push all the roots down so that the roots are at the bottom, just the way it would be in nature. And so again, now I'll really soak that. And the plant will be like, finally, some nutrition.
Water lately.
That's right. So the water is great for starting the roots, but once they have all those roots, then we can put them in. I've left one. It also put out some fresh growth here. So that's like a brand new lemongrass plant. So what will happen as I wet it and it starts to grow is it will grow from the center and grow up and turn into a new lemongrass plant. So that works well for a lot of different plants. Like one of the things that I do at home a lot is I purchase green onions, scallions, and I use the green part, and I leave about this much of the onion at the root end. And then I do this exactly the same thing. Fill a pot with dirt, and then stick my finger in, and then stick the green onion in. And after I've got about 6 or 7 of them, I'll transplant them into a big pot. And then I have a pot of onions. And that's really nice because I actually don't buy onions that much throughout the year. In the middle of winter I do, but the rest of the time I just cut off the green part, and the root part of the onion just keeps sending up new shoots. And so it just grows and grows and grows, and you always have onions. Yeah. They're really fertile.
That just from last year just came back up.
Yeah. Onions are really super fertile. So they're a really great plant to think about when you're looking for plants to grow. Another plant that I grew is a carrot. So you can see here, that's right, I just took the head of a carrot and planted it in some dirt. And it has started to take up nutrition from the dirt and put out this new carrot greenery. And so the reason that I did that is, once again, carrot is one of those umbelliferous flowers. So it puts out flowers and they're umbels, and that attracts the beneficial insects that eat aphids. So, like rabid carnivorous insects. And they're going to eat the aphids. So I've really focused on things like the cumin and this carrot. I'm planting some dill because dill is another a plant that flowers in umbrals. So I have all these plants that I'm hoping will attract the carnivorous insects that will eat aphids. So I'm hoping I can reduce my aphid population. Okay, so now let's do a bit more. First, let's do some harvesting.
Okay.
So you can see I brought along, this is my kale from last year. I plant kale every year on my birthday. For everyone who wants to know when my birthday is, it's July 2nd.
Put it in my calendar.
That's right.
And give you a cake so you can use the cake.
That's the cake tin. That's right. I was planning, like, I was born on July 2nd because my mom promised to take my brothers to the zoo on July 1st because the zoo was opening. So she just put off having a baby. That's why I was born on July 2nd. So I always plant kale on my birthday. So this was planted, it grew up, I cut it down, it grew up again through the winter, and then in February, about mid-February, it really started to take off again. And you can see it's got little broccolis at the top. And this is actually just the most delicious part of kale. It only happens to kale in the spring. All of these will actually flower, and then the flowers put out pods, and those pods are full of kale seeds. So if you want, you can let these go to seed. It's where you really start to see that canola is in the same family as all the other cabbages. It's a cruciferous plant. And because when kale has flowered and gone to seed, it looks exactly like canola, except for the curly leaves. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to harvest this kale. So just, these are fairly tough stems. So my poor X-Acto knife is barely up to the duty of cutting through them. Oops, there we go. So I'm just going to put these back here. I'm actually using these in a cooking class tomorrow. No, Thursday. That I think I might have made them in some of my past. The kale with tahini and hot peppers. It's a delicious dish. There we go. So that's my kale. I'm going to use that for the kale and tahini dish. And so now I brought along my little tiny shovel. And I'm just going to dig up these roots. Takes a while to free the kale plants from the dirt. There we go. And I just kind of shake that out. You can see the kale really, the roots really hold the dirt, which is like a good thing.
Now you just take some of the dirt off?
Yeah, I'm just, so I can reuse the dirt.
And if folks have questions, feel free to pop questions in the chat box. Just be sure to select all participants. And if folks on the video conference have questions too, just wave at us.
So now what I'm going to do is I brought along some fertilizer. So because this box has already been growing kale, I want to fertilize it so that it will have some good nutrition for the next kale. Because if you just grow stuff in your pots year after year after year, then you exhaust the nutrition of the soil. So I just put a scoop of fertilizer in. This is just general purpose fertilizer. It's 10, 10, 10. And I do actually have some fertilizer in here. I know that this soil is rich in calcium for kind of a sad reason. It's kind of a sad reason. Just tell everyone it's a sad reason.
Sad reason.
It's a sad reason. So for years, like many people, I had a pet. I had a pet cat.
Aw.
And sadly in 2012, my cat passed. And, you know, that's always a bit sad.
So hard, yeah.
And I don't have a backyard, so I couldn't bury my pet. So it makes me feel sort of proud to be a Vancouverite, because I took my cat to the pound and they cremated her. And what makes me proud to be a Vancouverite is just to know that my municipal tax dollars are being used so well that you can take your cat in and have them cremated. And I was so kindly treated at the pound. It was just really lovely. So I got my cat's ashes back. And, you know, I sort of thought about what could I do with my cat's ashes? Because she only ever lived in my apartment. I thought, well, I could like put her on the carpet and vacuum her back up. I thought, no, I will mix her with the pots on my balcony because she only ever lived in my apartment.
Yeah.
And so I wanted her to be in my apartment and sort of return to nature. And so that's the kind of sad reason that I know my pots are rich in calcium.
Wow.
Because they have the ashes of my cat in them. So perhaps that's a macabre story. Maybe it's not sad, it's macabre. And so now I've mixed that fertilizer in, and I've grown a couple of kale plants. So I grew these from seed too.
Yeah, it looks so different
Than the other kale. Yes, this is actually a different kind of kale. The kale that I took out, that is Scottish kale or curly kale. This is Portuguese kale.
Oh.
So it's very different. It is, you can see the leaves are very round, and it's a very sweet kale. I really like the flavor of this kale, even more than I like the curly kale. So once again, I'm just going to take that out. You can see how much roots have grown. Maybe the audience can't see. This is really quite drippy, Davina.
Yeah, you can see it.
Yeah. So the roots have filled this whole yogurt container, which you can see I drilled holes in the bottom of. So it's just great. So plants really want to grow. They really want to succeed in the world. So don't be afraid of growing plants because it's like, oh, I kill everything, right? It's really, they really want to succeed. And if just give them the chance. So once again, I'm pressing that firmly down in so that the roots...
Your conference is scheduled to end in 2 minutes.
We'll get it fixed.
We just got a little note from the... Oops. So I've just kind of split that in half, and I'm planting those 2 kale plants in my big container here. Pressing them firmly down in, and I will just transfer these outside now, because kale is very cold tolerant, as you can see from the one that grew all winter. And it's a really great plant, and I tend to plant it at the beginning of the year in the spring, and then again on my birthday. On my birthday, I just throw some kale seeds into the pot and just let it grow. In the springtime, I start some kale seeds in my little paper containers, my little paper pots, and then I transfer them to a larger pot, and then transfer them once more. I do the same thing pretty much with the tomato plants that I grow. Tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers. So there, now I have all my kale ready to grow. Okay, now let's get rid of some of the stuff from my table here.
Your conference is now over. Goodbye.
We'll try and dial you back in, conference folks. The
Okay.
webinar people are still here.
Okay, webinar people are here. Thanks for staying on, webinar people. Okay, so the next thing that I brought along, had some dirt dropped on it, my word. That I just basically brought this along to show folks that I'm fairly proud of. Do you know what this is?
Tobacco?
How'd you know? This is little tiny baby tobacco plants.
Because Davina said you might bring tobacco, that's how I knew.
So I was quite excited. Where's my cloth? Here it is. I brought a cloth. Especially, I can see my raggedy old cloth. Like, let's do some hand wiping. I brought the not my raggedy old cloth. I brought the tobacco because what I did this year is I went online and I found a place that sells organic tobacco seed. And this one, they have all kinds of tobacco. I was surprised. They have like fancy Virginia, and they have like cold tolerant tobacco, and they have all these different tobaccos. And so, oh, here we go. There we go. Hi again, Bella Bella. So I got this particular one. This is called Aztec Wild. And so this is actually wild tobacco. It says on the label, so it must be true, that it's very hardy and it's easy to grow in a cold climate, which I think we're kind of in for tobacco.
Yeah.
I don't know, they grow tobacco in Quebec, so it must be fairly cold tolerant to begin with. And, you know, even Virginia, where they grow a lot of tobacco, is quite cool at times of the year. So I got these. Now, tobacco seeds are extremely tiny, I have learned. So I just planted 2 or 3 seeds in each pot, and they came up just fine. And now you can see the seed leaves down at the bottom here, and then these are the true tobacco leaves here. The one really interesting thing that I've noticed over time is that each night the tobacco leaves fold up. And they stay folded up until the light hits them. And then they open up again. Now, maybe that happens just with little plants, but it's just really interesting. And so I grew this just to bring it along and show people, because the FNHA, as you know, likes to promote keeping tobacco sacred. And I always think back to when I was working, when I was working at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings, and they wanted to gift people with tobacco after they've testified. And so we'd have to run out and buy these big coffee cans of number 7 tobacco. Commercial tobacco. And I always thought that was kind of like icky.
Yeah.
It was like, and I thought, God, if we could just grow our own tobacco and give people, you know, this really meaningful tobacco that we worked on producing, that would be so much more honoring the tobacco plant. And so finally, after all these years, I've managed that, and I'd really like to encourage people. Now, I know that Davina will be posting the link to where I purchased these tobacco seeds. It's one of the organic tobacco vendors, and we're going to post that on the website.
Nice.
Yeah, so it's a real opportunity to truly keep tobacco sacred and grow your own.
I'm definitely going to do that.
Yeah, it's very cool. the last little bit I wanted to do was to take my other giant pot here and do some direct to seed planting. So I've just loosened all the dirt with my little tiny Reiki hoey thing. I don't know. That's right. And what I'm going to plant in here, about along my container, my seed container, is this Sugar Twin Original 25th Anniversary metal container. And one of the things that I love about it is that it actually seals fairly well. But the other thing that I keep in here is this. This is one of those silicone gel things, right, that you get in everything these days, right? And so I actually got a big one, and I keep it in with my seeds because that keeps the seeds dry.
And can seeds last several years?
Absolutely. You can see some of my seeds if I just go through them. I have some really old ones. Here's a really old one. Rosemary seeds, 1998. And the thing is that when seeds get older, they aren't as fertile as they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I just use more seeds.
Right.
It's kind of like, well, one of you will be fertile.
Right.
So I'll just put like 12 of you in, and you get, once again, you get 2 or 3 plants, and you can transplant them out. So what I'm going to put in my big pot here is some sweet peas.
Nice.
I particularly love these particular sweet peas. They're a kind called Machucana. Matucana, Machucana. They're a beautiful pink and purple sweet pea flower, but they're extremely aromatic. And so this I put in to attract bees, because the smell of these is just, particularly in the evening, it just permeates my whole balcony, and it's just such a lovely smell. I'm not a big odors person, and particularly with the scent-free environments, I really like it, because a lot of people wear some very strong scents. So I'm really liking the scent-free environments. But this is such a natural odor. And so they just look like peas. A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll soak sweet peas overnight. Just soak the seeds in water overnight and then plant them. Given the rains that we've had, I don't feel a need to do that, because right now
Water's so wet.
That's right. Everything's very, very wet. The other thing I'm going to mix in is some special bacteria. This they sell in most garden centers. It's called garden inoculant. And it's just a black powder. And I'm just going to sprinkle some of that black powder on. What this is the powder is full of bacteria. And it's a symbiotic bacteria. It's a bacteria that loves pea plants and bean plants, legumes. And so what it does is it helps them take nitrogen from the air and actually bring it into the plant and down into the roots, and really helps to fertilize the soil and helps the plants to grow up really, really healthy. Really helps them to fix nitrogen, it's called. So I'm just mixing that in. Some people, because they've wet their seeds, they'll just roll the wet seeds in the inoculant powder and then plant them. But my seeds aren't wet. And so...
Is it good to also plant other flowers to attract bees?
Absolutely. In fact, there's a whole initiative sort of throughout gardening world to plant more flowers to attract bees, because people are concerned about the disappearance of bees. And so there's the honeybees that they're concerned about, but there's honeybees are just one kind of bee, and there's actually hundreds of kinds of bees, many which are solitary bees. So things like the mason bees, or everyone's favorite, the bumblebee.
Yes, the cute one.
That's right, the cute one. Here's my bumblebee story. I was out riding my bike one day out here on Marine Drive, which has a slight slope to it. And I was going really, really fast. I was like, look at me. I'm so speedy. I'm fast. And a bumblebee went buzzing by me. Just like...
I'm faster.
That's right, a bumblebee. I'm not even as fast as a bumblebee. So, nature teaches us important lessons. So I'm just taking peas and I'm just planting them in a circle. I'm not too worried. Some plants you need to space, because having one or two plants in a pot is all that you can effectively fertilize. And if you plant more than one or two plants, they won't grow well. That's why I only have the 2 kales. But peas, they're like chickens. They love to be in a huddle. They love to huddle together. And so I plant lots of peas in the same pot. And, I'd mixed in my inoculant. And I'm using a few extra seeds because, again, this is an older... How old are these ones? 2014. So I'm planting a few extras. If they all come up, well, then they'll all be cozy and cuddly. When you're planting seeds, what you want to do is look... People may not be able to see. Why don't you just pick up one seed? Look at the size of the seed. That you want to plant seeds about twice the depth of the seed. So some seeds are really tiny and you just have to brush some dirt over them. These ones are about maybe 1/8 of an inch. And so I just push them down into the soil. You want to plant seeds so that they're in about twice their depth of soil. Okay. And just cover them all over. Couple peeking through there. And that's it. Now I'll just put this out in the rain. Again, peas, they're a very cold tolerant crop. Even the sweet peas. Sweet peas are just peas. Right now I have some snow peas growing on my balcony, and they're about that high. And I planted them in mid-February. So they didn't come up for a while. Then at the beginning of March, they poked their heads through, and now they're growing like wildfire. And so I'll have peas probably in about May. So we've talked about all kinds of things. We talked about pots and how to make pots from just about anything. We talked about starting seeds in pots for transplantation later. We talked about transplanting. We talked about things you can grow from others. So there's things like the lemongrass, things like green onions, the carrots. You can snap the top off of a pineapple and stick it in dirt, and it will grow into a nice house plant. It probably won't ever produce another pineapple, but it does make actually quite a nice, looks sort of like an aloe vera, those long, sharp leaves. So plants you can grow from other plants, and then plants you can grow from seeds, and transplanting plants and burying the stems. So we've kind of talked about everything that's basic. There's all kinds of places to get seeds. So one of my personal favorites is West Coast Seeds. And they produce, one of the nice things about West Coast Seeds is they produce this garden porn. And they show you all these beautiful pictures about this is what it should look like. And it's really nice. The reason that I love it so much is not the pictures, but rather these charts. This chart is actually on their website, and I know that Davina has posted the link on the website. And this chart shows you exactly when you should plant things. That it says these ones with the little dots, you should start those as transplants indoors. You can transplant them outdoors when the asterisks are shown, or you can direct seed them outdoors. So it's a whole chart, and it has one for vegetables and one for herbs and one for flowers. So that's why, and most of what I've learned about gardening, I've learned because both here in the catalog and on the website, they have really good instructions for each plant.
Mm-hmm.
So they tell you how to grow carrots, how to grow peas,
Mm-hmm.
how to grow cabbage.
Whether they like light or shade.
That's right. And also what bugs they will get. Right? Like these ones, they actually attract bugs. These ones, oh, they have these bad bugs that here's how to avoid them. You know, maybe spray with copper. And they're an organic gardening company. I don't necessarily garden organically because I don't have enough dirt to make good, healthy dirt.
Mm-hmm.
So I use some like fertilizer supplements and things like that. But I also don't like to use pesticides.
Mm-hmm.
I do use one pesticide, and that's diatomaceous earth.
Mm-hmm.
Diatomaceous earth is ground up seashells, basically. Insects, they are just eating away, and if they eat some of that because you've sprayed diatomaceous earth on the plant, then it gets inside them, and it's very sharp.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just works its way out, and it actually kills the insects.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another thing that I brought along is several books that I like. This book is Growing Vegetables West of the Cascades. So this is an American book that's talking about what they called the Cascade Mountains. And so it talks about, it's written in Oregon, but it pertains very well to BC, Lower Mainland. Then this is one of my favorites, The Edible Container Garden, right? And it's by Michael Guerra, and it has really good advice. It's actually a British book, so suited to our rainy seasons. So I like that one. This one, Groundbreaking Food Gardens, it just has all kinds of really, really innovative ways to grow foods. So it's got things like vertical gardens and community gardens and hydroponic gardens, and it's about different ways of growing. And then this is one of my all-time favorites, The Complete Book of Edible Landscaping. So this was written back in the 70s by Rosalind Creasy, and it talks about using food plants as landscaping. So using things like the pinon pine, the pine that produces pine nuts, using that instead of a standard pine. Using artichokes, because artichokes produce big, showy flowers. And so all kinds of ways to use edible plants in your landscaping plans for people who want to naturalize. And it also talks about where those plants naturally grow. So that sounds like a lot like what you were doing and buying local indigenous plants, right? So some of our things like, I've always wanted to create, my apartment is at the top of the building, and so I'd like to create a little barrier so that if someone somehow got on our roof, they couldn't actually get down into my apartment. So I'd like to put up a whole trough of Oregon grape. So I have a whole bunch of Oregon grape growing up over the edge of the roof.
Right?
That's right, it's very pokey plant. So it's like, danger. So anyways, I've showed you all kinds of things, all kinds of stages of planting, and a few books, and we'll have those all posted on the website. And so I think I'm all talked out now.
All right, well, we'll see if there's questions. And again, in the chat box, just make sure you select all participants. How about on the video conference? Any questions?
Nope, I see
No?
shaking heads.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll sit down so I can see the chat box
I'll
here.
sit down too.
So any questions for Gerry? I know I learned more than I ever have about gardening in the last hour. My husband and I have just tried to
do a bit of gardening, but don't know what we're doing at all. And I've learned like 100 times what I knew before.
Yeah, well, and it's all from mistakes.
Yeah.
Right? So don't worry about the plants that you put in that die, because next year they won't.
Right. Yeah.
It's I always think about Jerry Oleman telling the story of making a snowshoe, and the first snowshoe that he ever made, and it took him forever, and he said, and he looked at it at the end of it, and he was so disappointed, and the elder that was working with him years ago said, it doesn't matter, the next one will be better.
That's right.
All right. Okay. So we got one question here. So thank you. That was great. Just wondering if you have any suggestions for books for gardening in Northern Alberta.
Northern Alberta. No, what I'd suggest is go to your garden center.
Mm-hmm.
Go to your Northern Alberta Garden Center and talk to the practitioners there. Like, yes, they're salespeople, but they ended up being salespeople in garden centers because they're really engaged.
Yeah.
Right? And they may have books.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was born and raised in Edmonton, which is central Alberta. They call it Northern Alberta, but it's central. And we had a full garden always when I was growing up. And it was your basic carrots and corn and rutabagas and things like that. So.
Okay, so another question. What is good to grow in dry, semi-desert area, food plant?
Well, of course, there's all the things that we're currently growing agriculturally. So things that love sun, right? The great thing about dry climates is that they're very sunny. And so you can grow a lot of things that really need lots of sun, which includes all kinds of vegetables and fruits, because we have the ability to irrigate and to water. So it's not good necessarily on an agricultural level, but in a home garden, you can grow just about anything in an arid climate because of your ability to water. And even with watering restrictions, those don't usually pertain to food crops, right? I know here in Vancouver anyways, that there's all kinds of watering restrictions, but you're still allowed to water your garden. And I know the same is true of in Victoria and in Kamloops, that even though there's watering restrictions and you can't water lawns and things like that, you can still water vegetable gardens.
And a question here, what can you do about grasshoppers?
Eat them.
Put some chocolate on them.
That's what I'd say. Aside from that, I'm not sure. Again, I would check with garden centers, so grasshoppers, locusts, a lot of things like, for example, slugs. I just pick them off. I live on the 4th floor and I still get slugs. I don't know where they come from. Do they crawl up the building or what? But I just pick them off, right? And so I'm thinking big bugs like grasshoppers, you may have to trap and release or deep fry.
Mm-hmm. Are there good plants for the sun versus the shade?
Well, vegetables are all sun plants, right? So as someone who grows predominantly food, things like tomatoes, peppers, okra, all of those are plants that really grow well with lots and lots of sun. Shade plants, there are sort of vegetable shade plants. It would be things like lettuce and spinach and orach. I have some at home. I grew some, it's called miner's lettuce. And it's a fairly unique, quite sort of semi-sweet, semi-bitter plant. But it's all the rage. Everybody's using miner's lettuce now.
So there's a question, why do you grow lemongrass and what is it?
Oh, I grow lemongrass because it's supposed to keep mosquitoes away. It is it's often grown, I think, as an ornamental grass. It's a fairly big plant, like it's about 2 to 3 feet high, and so it grows in a clump, and they grow up and bend over. But it does have a very lemony smell. If you've had Thai food, you've probably tasted lemongrass, because some of the things like pad thai or the Thai peanut soup taste a lot of lemongrass. And so it's got a really lemony, sharp flavor. And so it does, you can also use it as a spice. I'm growing it because it's purported to keep biting insects down.
I know my husband puts it in a iced tea.
Oh yeah.
So it's just a nice flavor.
Yeah, and it is. It's just a big, tall grass.
So, question, I live in the Fraser Valley and have a problem with slugs eating my new baby plants. I have the carrot top, celery, and romaine started in water to plant into soil.
So all I can suggest for slugs, because certainly you can use poisons, and there's slug bait out there. My slug solution is picking them, which means touching them, right? Which I'm personally comfortable with, and I'm like, I just gather them all and take them and dump them outside. I don't, like, they probably climb back up the 4 stories and come back again. I don't know. I just pick them all off, and I just have like a little bowl, and I pick them off and put them in the bowl, and then take them outside into our we have paving stone backyard, and so I just dump them there. And it's like, be free, slugs.
Go forth. What spices do you grow?
I grow a lot of basil. I don't actually grow that many spices. Some herbs, I have oregano, I have thyme, I have rosemary. I grow a lot of basil. I have 2 buckets like this full of basil. And I just keep harvesting it, and it grows back, and harvest it, and it grows back. And near the end of the year, I take it and I make pesto, and then freeze the pesto in like 2 tablespoon dollops. And that works really, really well for me.
We like growing mint for making mint tea.
Yeah. I'm slightly wary of mint. I always tell people, plant it in a pot. So put some mint in a pot and plant the whole pot in the ground. Otherwise, you'll have a mint lawn. It really, really spreads. It's a very, very vigorous plant.
And what veggie flowers are good for hummingbirds?
I don't know. I don't know. I would think hummingbirds like deep flowers, and there aren't a lot of vegetables, like maybe squash, have quite deep flowers. But I mean, that's what hummingbirds are after with their long beaks, is something they can dip into. So I don't actually know. The only vegetable with a deep flower that comes to my mind is a squash.
And you have tips for prepping your soil before starting your garden in spring.
If you're in a garden, take a fork and dig it up and turn it over. And then there are some books that recommend the lasagna method, which is take a shovelful, like a forkful of dirt out, and put down a layer of newspapers, and then put half a forkful back, and then a layer of compost, and then the other, so that you have layers like lasagna. And you layer your dirt, as many layers as you want. Definitely your dirt should be turned over. But also a lot of people these days are using row cover, which is sort of cloth-like material that you lay over your rows, and that keeps the wind from blowing your soil away. Because that's one of the big issues in a big garden, is that the loss of your topsoil. And, soil is a very valuable commodity.
And I've tried crushed eggshells, and it seems to cut down on the number of slugs.
Yeah, I've heard that. I don't eat enough eggs, I guess. I've also heard sand, that really coarse sand, because they crawl on their bellies and they don't like the feeling of sand. And then I've also heard strips of copper, that when they crawl across it, it actually creates an electrical shock that they don't like. So, but I just pick them off. I'm sticking with picking them off. That's right.
How do you keep deer away? You won't have that problem in your apartment, but
Yeah, no, I know. It's like people in I have a friend in Victoria, and he has a 6-foot fence,
Yeah.
and he says the deer just jump over it, just standing one side and just jump and land in his yard, and he said nothing stops them. So I really don't have any suggestions.
Plant more plants. So you
Yeah, or harvest deer. That would be my suggestion. That has added deliciousness.
Yes.
But
Some
anyways,
free range meat.
that's right.
And if someone's just starting with gardening, what might be an easy plant that they could have success with?
Well, radishes are always successful.
Mm-hmm.
You take some radish seeds, throw them on just throw them, and radishes grow. And they grow really fast.
Yeah.
And the thing is people don't have a lot of radish recipes. So actually, sauteed radishes. If you grow some of the longer radishes and slice them and then saute them, they're actually quite tasty because you can only put so many radishes in a salad, right? And then also I like adding radishes to fermented cabbage. So kimchi would be one thing if people have access to the Korean red pepper. The other thing would just be to add radishes to sauerkraut, which is just cabbage and salt. And so throw some radishes in, and they give great flavor there. There are so many kinds, because you can grow huge radishes, the lobak, the big Chinese radishes, or you can grow the little tiny red ones that are so familiar, but there's lots of in-between ones that are tubular radishes but are only about that big. And even when I was just out at like Home Depot, they had about 4 kinds of radish. So radishes are really great for like, look at what I did. They grow really easy. After that, I'd say peas, particularly the snap peas, the kind where you eat the pod.
And those are very tasty.
Yeah, so snow peas and snap peas, those are really good. Later in the year, in about late June and July, planting beans. Beans are another really fertile crop, particularly the runner beans. So there's bush beans, which grow in a bushy plant, and pole beans, which grow in a vine, and then runner beans, which grow in a really long vine. And the runner beans, they're pretty fail-safe too.
You can your tomatoes.
Yeah, canning tomatoes. Now, I pressure can my tomatoes, even though you don't have to. I like pressure canning them because you only have to process them for about 5 minutes in the pressure canner. So you actually are short processing them if you cut them in slices or quarters. So I do like to can, but I also like to, I grow mostly cherry tomatoes. And so for cherry tomatoes, I just cut them in half and then dehydrate them. And I put my dehydrator in the sun, and that way they're sun-dried tomatoes. And I use those all winter. So I store them in the freezer just because, not because they need to be frozen, but because the freezer keeps them really dry. And I just throw them into things all winter long, and they add tomato deliciousness. So certainly I do can some tomatoes. Mostly I can commercial tomatoes. I buy Romas and can them. But then I dry my cherry tomatoes. And I grow lots of colors. So I grow some indigo ones and some golden ones and some red ones. And there's beautiful tomatoes out there. There's the West Coast Seeds folks. They have one called Tumbler that is meant to be grown in hanging baskets. So it isn't upright. It grows out and down. And it's really, really nice to grow. It's like I say, it's called Tumbler tomato.
And someone did a little check on keeping dogs out of your garden, and it said, other than fencing, but suggestions were odors that they don't like to smell.
Yeah, and I couldn't speak to that actually. I don't know.
Right.
What was I going to say? Can't think.
Any other
questions or comments? We've got a
Oh, we have a
comment.
hand up at the
Oh.
First Nations Telehealth Bridge.
Okay, go ahead.
How would you get seeds from wild plants to replant next year? Like, we have lots of wild strawberries around here.
Yeah, so you can, like, strawberries is a good example. You can just harvest the strawberries or just watch the strawberries and let some of them dry out and then harvest them and then plant those. Just with strawberries, I just plant the whole berry. The same would be true of things like Oregon grape. If you let the berries dry out and then harvest them, you can use those as seeds. I don't know that much about other types of plants. So, like, I don't know, nothing's leaping to mind. Again, one thing to do would be to touch base with a local garden center, and they may have suggestions. You did remind me, though, that one thing that a lot of communities have are seed banks or seed libraries. So Squamish, where I work, the Squamish Public Library has a seed library. And so people bring in their extra seeds instead of saving them like I do in a little canister. They actually bring them into the seed library, and people can just take a few seeds out of a package, and that's a really great way. So a lot of places either have things like the CD Saturday celebrations, or they have seed libraries. So that's a great place to get. And then the other thing I'd suggest would be talk to elders, because elders probably have more insights than I do about harvesting and replanting native plants, indigenous plants.
We do have a session coming up on that as well in May. How much money do you save growing your own?
I don't save much money. I don't even know if I save any money. I really grow them for the sort of the joy of growing, and gardening is a very calming activity and is, I think, really, really good for your mental health, and that's what it brings for me. So I do only grow plants that I know will taste better if I grow them.
Mm-hmm.
So tomatoes is the best example. But things like snow peas and things like that, they're so much better. But I don't have a huge amount of space.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't grow an enormous amount of product.
Mm-hmm.
I think people can grow quite substantial amounts of vegetables and save a lot of money if they have land available to them that they can cultivate.
Mm-hmm.
I think on a lot of reserves, the issue would be animals, right? Like deer.
Mm-hmm.
Deer are really bad for gardens.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how do you eat Oregon grape?
I like Oregon grape just made into jelly. Although, again, it was just a bit of a slight letdown that I harvested all this Oregon grape and I took them home and I made jelly. And when I came to eat it, it just tasted like grape jelly. I thought it would be some sort of wild, exotic grape jelly, and it just really tasted like grape jelly. And so it's great. If you like grape jelly, Oregon grapes are the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'm always interested in is fermentation, to take things and let them ferment. And so that would be, I imagine, Oregon grape wine.
Well, we've been growing Oregon grape, but I didn't think to pick the berries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would think they would go well as a condiment for meat, too, because they're extremely tart, right? And so when you make the jelly, you have to add a moderate amount of sugar. But I think if you just use them as a condiment, crush them and rub them onto meat, that would bring a really great tartness to something like wild meats, where you probably want to mellow out the wild flavor.
Can you make wine with it?
I'm thinking you can. I mean, you can make wine with just about any fruit that will ferment. I think it would be a very dry wine because they're so. I mean, wine always depends on how much sugar is in the fruit. So I think it would be quite a dry wine.
And do you talk to your plants, and does it make a difference?
Yes. I don't know if it makes a difference because I always talk to them. Although I should admit that some of the talking is probably cursing.
Actually, it does. I've seen it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Davina says that it makes a big difference. So,
And do you pickle any of your food?
no, because I don't produce enough to pickle. I would love to pickle, and I certainly make a lot of sauerkraut, and do make like a lot of pickled beans. I love pickled asparagus. I make the dilled, spicy pickled asparagus, and it is delicious. But asparagus is one of those crops that you actually need a fair chunk of land to get any kind of reasonable sized crop. You know, you can plant a little bit in one of these and you'll get like 3 spears, which I'm sure will be delicious. But to me, it's about, I have such limited space that I want to grow abundant plants like tomatoes.
Okay. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left. Are there any last questions or comments? Okay. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Very important skill to know how to grow our own food. And thank Gerry for sharing all of his knowledge today. And as I said, I've learned more than I ever have about gardening in the last hour. And thank Davina, who's helping us out in the room here too. And have a good day, everyone. Thanks for joining, and good luck with your gardens.
Thanks, everyone.